everyone, it's Sharon here. Today I've got a mixed media style journal for you. This is using the new Sizzix Eileen Hull Pocket Notebook die. It's a Bigz die, and as you can see it's one of the longer dies, so you do need the extended cutting plates for this if you're using the standard Big Shot. If you've got the Big Shot Plus, this is the plates, the standard plates are fine. And I'm also using some of the new mat board from Sizzix. This is the perfect size for using with these dies, so it saves having to cut down larger sheets because this is already the right width. And I've got some double-sided adhesive. I've got mine on a roll here actually. And what I'm going to do is I'm just putting adhesive to the top part. The width of this roll is actually long enough for the journal part of the die, because on this die you've got not only the journal but you've also got an area that cuts pages to go inside, but I'm going to add notebooks into this, so I don't need the pages. So this piece that I've stuck the adhesive on will actually be just the right size for cutting just the journal page from. Now what I'm going to do is I'll cut this down so that it's easier to work with, and I'm using some of the Sizzix textures, surfaces. I've got the white one here, and the reason I'm adding this is because the texture of this is really nice to work with if you're going to be adding paint or any sort of paste or any wet medium really. It's almost like watercolour card in terms of the way it sort of doesn't get sort of soggy, I guess is the easiest way to describe it. So it's great if you want to make journals that you're going to add different mediums to, as I am here. So I'm just I've covered both in one go, and then I can just snip down the middle. Now this die cuts one part of the journal as such, the front or the back, so you need to cut it twice. So I'm using this is my limited edition Big Shot, but this is the standard size Big Shot, so I'm using the extended cutting pads, and as you can see it goes through that no problem. So I've got that can be the front or the back, and then I'll do one more. And you can see here, if you have your cutting pad slightly overhanging at the front, then it's easier to feed it through. I'll just pop my machine out the way. So now I've got a front and a back, and both are covered with that lovely surfaces, which, as I say, is a really great texture for working on. So now I've got, this is basically a blank canvas, so I can decorate this in any way I want to. I'm using acrylic paints. These are the Paper Artsy Fresco finish paints, and I thought I'd go with a green and yellow scheme. So I'm just going to pop some of these into a palette to make it easier to work with. And before I start painting, I want to add a bit of texture to this. So what I'm going to do is add some rice paper. I'm just going to tear a little piece. One piece for the front, one piece for the back. And I'm going to emboss these. So I'm just going to grab one of my 3D embossing folders. And I can do both sheets at once because obviously this is only thin. And I'll just run that through off camera. There we go. And you can see that's given a lovely pattern. And the beauty of using rice paper is I can glue this onto the front. I can just tear it and glue it down. And because it's so thin, you won't really see the edge too much. So I'm just going to roughly tear it. The one thing with using rice paper with embossing folders like this is you do want to be careful as you glue it down, because obviously if you while it's wet with the glue, I'm using collage medium Ranger distress collage medium, as you're pressing this down, if you're not careful you will press out the embossing really, you'll sort of flatten it. So don't be too heavy-handed, just lay it down and pat on it, and that will be enough for the glue to stick it down without sort of squishing away the pattern. So that's going to give a lovely background. I'm just going to give that a quick dry with my heat tool. I just want the glue to be dry enough so that when I start to paint it won't lift off. I'm just going to wet my brush slightly and then randomly apply a bit of colour. As you can tell, I'm not being very precise at all. You do want to go over the where the embossing is to sort of get the paint into the nooks and crannies, because I want this to have a fairly good coverage. I don't mind a little bit of white peeping through, but I want it to be mostly coloured. So what I'll do is water down some paint just to fill in all the gaps. Now I've only used two colours here, the green and the yellow. Obviously you do want to be careful which colours you choose, because you want colours kind of a similar colour family. You could go with blues and greens, or blues and yellows. I did one recently actually with blue and purple, which looked lovely. Obviously the colours will blend together a little bit, so you will end up with mud if you pick contrasting colours that you know don't mix well. So bear that in mind. Now I just want to highlight really those embossed areas. So I've got some acrylic metallic paint. You can see mine has been a bit neglected, and I've got a lovely paint film all over the top, so I'm just going to get rid of that. And I realised quite quickly that actually this is probably going to be best applied with my fingers, so I'm just going to put a bit on my palette and rub it on. I want it to highlight the raised areas, and of course using a brush it tends to sort of get in the nooks and crannies, which I don't want. I want to highlight the embossing, so although it's a bit messy, rubbing this in with your fingers does give a better result. And I thought this sort of bronzy colour worked really well with the green and the yellow, because I've kind of ended up with quite an olive sort of look. So I think this sort of brassy bronze colour looks really good. So I'll do the same to the back. And as you can see, as I'm doing this, that embossed image is really kind of beginning to pop. And once I've gone over that, I'm going to go around the edges as well, just to give a bit more definition to the edges. And as you can see, I'm really not being too careful or neat. You really don't want to be neat, because otherwise you end up with very much of a sort of straight line, and it doesn't look natural. So that's one layer, and I'm thinking it probably needs a bit more of a colour variation. So what I've grabbed is some Prima wax. This is in a white gold. I thought it'll just lighten up some of the areas, just to give some different tones of metallic really. And I'm finding that I've had this in a drawer and it's a bit cold, so you can see I'm rubbing it on my hand a bit as well actually, I'm finding it's not going on so well because it's cold. But yeah, that just gives a bit of variation. I don't know how well you can see it on camera really as opposed to real life, but it's nice just to have a few different colours. And again, I thought the areas aside from the embossing needed a bit more as well. So what I've grabbed here, this is Prima brass paste. This has got a slightly different texture to the acrylic paint that I applied first. This one's got more of a sort of gel-like texture really. So having those three different metallics on there I think gives quite a good variety. So I'm just checking how this is going to look when it's put together, and I'm quite happy with that. I think it's got quite a good background for it. I'm afraid I've jumped ahead a bit here because my video obviously wasn't recording when I stuck down the embellishments. But what I've done is I've added some metal embellishments to the front. I've stuck them down with heavy gel medium, and the embellishments, the florals are Prima embellishments, and then that little text banner is a Tim Holtz embellishment. And then I've got these little padlock and a key. These were from Creative Expressions. I've had them some time actually, but the colour doesn't really go because I've gone for quite a bronzy brassy look. I thought I'd alter these a little bit. So what I've got is a couple of different embossing powders. I've got a Seth Apter one, which gives a sort of a bronzy sort of look. And then I've got a verdigris sort of like patina sort of effect. And what I've done is I've used some Wow mixed media embossing with a brush. You could just rub it with a Versamark ink if you prefer, but I find this brush is quite good for adding details like this because, well, you don't mess up your ink pad quite so much. My Versamark ink pad looks disgusting from where I've sort of rubbed it over various things to do things like this. So having the brush is quite a good idea actually. So I'm just adding on a bit of both powders really, so that it's got a bit of variation on it. This is a great way to transform embellishments, particularly if you've got some that are sort of painted and you don't like the colours or whatever. Covering them with embossing powder is a great way to sort of tie them in with your project and get the look you want. So I'm just brushing on a bit more of that mixed media liquid from Wow. You do want to make sure if you're doing this with metal embellishments, make sure you're using tweezers to hold the metal, because obviously once you start heating that metal it gets red hot. So you do definitely want to be careful and not handle it while it's hot. So doing the same again with this little padlock. And of course this works with any colours of embossing powder you've got. I've deliberately picked these two because I wanted to keep these looking sort of like rusty metal. But obviously if you did just want a colour to tie in with the journal cover, you could use any colour you like. So I've now put my journal together. I've used red line tape to assemble it, and then I've threaded some black elastic through the holes so that I can slip notebooks through. And what I'm doing now is I've just got some nice green cord. It's like a nylon cord, so that I can hang that key and locket down the side. I'm just going to shorten this slightly because I think it was a little bit too long. It's really simple to just add something with those holes. You can just thread it through and tie a knot. So that is my journal finished. All I need to do is add in some notebooks. Hopefully that's given you some ideas for this pocket notebook. If you need details of any of the products I've used, I'll put details of everything in the description box on YouTube, and I'll also put some more details on my blog. Hopefully this video's been interesting to you, and I will definitely be back soon with another video. So thank you so much for joining me today. Bye.